After a quick word from FanDuel. You guys know I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer and fewer games, and the sports just aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right, there's something for everyone every day all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/UCSS and start making the most of your summer. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball and the Ultimate Cleveland Sports Show. And with that, we're going to welcome on Joe Doyle, an MLB Draft expert from the Future Stars series. Joe, thanks for joining us today. How you doing?
I'm good, fellas. How we doing today?
Joe, before we get started, I was talking to Mike before the show, and before we can have any sort of conversation about the Guardians and the number one overall pick, I think if you can explain slot money and contract money, because people who are in Cleveland have PTSD from Dolan spending, and they hear this guy would cost less, and they immediately think, well, it's the Dolan's at it again. And
it's unacceptable either way.
But I just wanted to explain the draft, because I think this lays the groundwork for the rest of the conversation of who they're looking at and why, and what slot money means, and then what you do with that money later on in the draft if you can sign a guy for less at the top.
Yeah, so very, very quickly, in layman's terms, every team is given a certain amount of money that they are allowed to spend in any one given draft. If you go over that amount, you are penalized in different ways. So you are almost never going to find a team that doesn't spend their full amount. Now, when people say take a deal or underslot or, pay someone a little bit less in the first round, all it means is they're moving money around. So if they save $1 million or $1.5 million on the number one pick in the class, it means they can spend that money elsewhere. And what do I mean by elsewhere? Well, players in high school have more leverage to ask for more money because they can still go to college and hope to improve their draft stock. So if Cleveland wants to go after a high ceiling high school pitcher, for example, in the third round that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to afford, saving some money with the number one overall pick allows them to do that. So it's what makes, at least in my opinion, it's what makes the MLB draft the most fascinating draft, because it's not always the quote unquote best player available. It's how can we maximize our bonus pool and how can we get the most talent in one giant class.
But Joe, to me, when you have the first pick in the draft, we're not talking about pick 20 or 15. When you have the first pick in the draft, to not take the best player to me is stupid. I don't care if you have more money to spend in the third round, second round, fourth round. You have a chance to get the best player, and it's clear at least that most people seem to think at least there's two guys that are clear, line of demarcation after the top two guys. I don't know if you agree with that, but that's everything I've read. That seems to be the case. So if the Guardians went any lower than one of those two guys, just to have more money to spend in a later round, to me that's stupid. Do you agree or no?
I think in any other year, I would agree. I mean, if you look back at the 2023 draft, you got Paul Skeens, you got Dylan Cruz. Those are prohibitive, conventional, traditional, number one overall prospects. They play center field, 6'6" on the mound. Like, they check every box, right? What Cleveland is choosing from this year is it's not an especially sexy draft, right? There is no Bobby Witt Jr. in this class. There is no Adley Rutschman in this class.
Okay.
Cleveland is choosing from a college second baseman, which I can't stress this enough. In the history of the draft, we have never seen a second baseman drafted number one overall. And he's coming from the Pac-12, which everyone has their opinions on. And then on the other side of things, you have Charlie Condon, who, it's kind of hard to poke holes in Charlie Condon other than his home and road splits are just very, very extreme. So to answer your question, if there was a no doubt bombshell superstar type prospect, I think it would make the Cleveland Guardians selection a whole lot easier. But because there's not that, really that stud out there in conventional terms, I think they have the ability to kind of, pick and choose who they want. Because here's the thing. I think the difference between Bazzana, who's talked about a lot as the number one pick from Oregon State, and J.J. Wetherholt, the shortstop from West Virginia, the difference between those two, while one guy gets a ton of headlines and the other doesn't, is actually quite marginal. One guy just had a hamstring injury all year and the other guy didn't.
I mean, that's fair. If you if you're the evaluator, in your opinion, those guys are neck and neck. And if the Guardians feel the same way, then I'm with you. Then it's not stupid. You're right. If you feel like the two prospects are neck and neck, then yeah, it makes sense to take the guy you could sign for less and be able to use it later. We don't know that they feel the same way that you do, but it'll be interesting. And it's an interesting point. Obviously, we knew there was no Paul Skeens in this draft, but I didn't realize that it was as dramatic as you said. But obviously, you follow this really closely. If it were up to you, or if you were evaluating, forget the money, who do you think is going to be the best player in this draft?
I really do think, and I'm not trying to hedge, I do think it's a toss-up between Chase Burns and Charlie Condon. And the one thing that you cannot teach in any one draft is size. I mean, Travis Bazzana is never going to be 6'6". He's never going to have the levers and the raw power that Charlie Condon does. And then on the other side, Chase Burns has 101 mile an hour fastball. He's throwing 90 mile an hour sliders. He's throwing 86 mile an hour curveballs, and he throws strikes. And he's been doing it for 3 years. So in those respects, I think either one of those guys in different ways are going to end up being the top player in the class. But, again, as you compare those two players to the guys from here, you certainly wouldn't take a Chase Burns over a Paul Skeens. And you compare a guy like Charlie Condon, who has his limitations. He's going to play right field, or he's going to play an average third base. You stack him against a guy like Dylan Cruz or Wyatt Langford, and you can kind of understand where I'm coming from. I mean, you will. I think Cleveland will take the player that they believe is the best player available, and because the number one pick in any draft has no leverage, they will get probably $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 off what that signing bonus of $10.5 million is. So they're going to get a deal in any way, shape, or form. But Bazzana in the 2023 draft probably is the number 6 pick, 5 or 6 pick, and Condon last year is probably the number 4 or number 5 pick. So it's just not as star-studded and dynamic at the top as I think Cleveland would hope, but they're still going to take the best player available, and they're still going to get a haircut.
Joe, you look at Ohtani and the rise of guys pitching and hitting and doing both. Are there any guys in this draft or that are coming up that could possibly be, not saying that Ohtani, but teams would look at letting them pitch as well as hit?
Yeah, so I think the guy that you're referring to is Jac Caglianone. He's the first baseman and left-handed pitcher from the University of Florida. He's up to 99 from the left side. But here's the thing. His bat has been so special this year. And just not to get too far into the weeds, but Caglianone swung at 57% of the pitches this year. That's extremely high. He chased outside of the zone 36% of the time. That's extremely high. And he still found a way to run a 9% strikeout rate, all while hitting 35 homers. I mean, making sense of that math doesn't even make sense. It's a special bat. I think the bat is actually so special that teams are just going to say, to hell with letting him pitch. He still throws quite a few pitches outside of the zone. There's command and control issues. I think you look at it this way. If you put Caglianone on the mound and he hurts his elbow, well, then you're taking the bat out of his hands like you did with Bryce Harper and Jason Dominguez and some of these guys that got hurt with Tommy John. And I think it really slows his offensive track. So chances are Caglianone projects as a bullpen piece. And if that's the case, I think you just put a bat in his hands and say, hey, why don't you just become the most prodigious slugger you can, show what you've continued to show at the University of Florida, and let's see how quickly you can move.
Joe, do you think this epidemic of arm injuries will have any impact on drafts moving forward, just in terms of the value of pitching? Obviously, everybody needs pitching. But if it's close, would the team start to lean hitter over pitcher just because at this point it's inevitable everybody's going to have Tommy John surgery at some point? Or does that not factor into it?
I think the only thing that I've noticed over the last 6 or 7 years of covering this is the high school righty that has size and is throwing 99, he's not always a top 5, not always a top 10. In fact, sometimes they're not even a first-round pick. I mean, last year, I'm trying to remember who drafted him, but there was a kid out of the state of Texas, 6'6". His name is Travis Bazzana. He was 97 to 99 all the time. I mean, it was always upper 90s fastball. And I think if you looked at the late 90s, you looked at the early 2000s, that kid's off the board in the top 5 picks. No question about it. He's 6'6", he's a righty, he's a high school arm, he's up to 99, he's going to be a horse, right? I think there's some trepidation with that now, with teams looking at this epidemic and going, would we rather have a kid that is throwing 99 as a 16 or 17-year-old, or would we rather have the kid who is maybe a little bit smaller and was 92 as a sophomore, 94 as a junior, and then he's touching 95, 96 with some projection as a high school senior? Some of these kids that are throwing ultra hard at the early stages of their career are getting poked at a little bit because the risk with injury is so high. So I think it's going to continue to progress over the years as the draft and research and development and understanding of injuries continues to evolve. But to answer your question in a more succinct way, yeah, it's definitely had an impact on some of those younger guys that are already throwing super hard.
Real quick, can you just give us the overall view of Wetherholt, only because ESPN, I know a couple weeks ago, put him out as who they thought, Kylie put it out as the number 1 pick, and everyone was like, JJ Wetherholt. Because all we'd ever heard was Condon and Bazzana. So just a quick overview of Wetherholt's game and why he would be in contention for that number 1 pick. And also the fact that it's all hitters, and we know the Guardians' history with pitching, but we haven't really, you mentioned Burns, but there really hasn't been a whole lot of talk about a pitcher going number 1. It's all hitters.
Yeah, well, with my recent mock draft, I actually did mock Chase Burns to the Guardians. I think nobody's talking about it, but I think it's a very real possibility. And I think, especially if Chase Burns is willing to take a haircut to save $1 million to go number 1, I think it's definitely in the cards. But to answer your question on JJ Wetherholt, I think the most important place to start and to remember is JJ Wetherholt almost unanimously on February 1st was the number 1 prospect in this draft. He quickly hurt his hamstring. He missed 7 or 8 weeks. And that cost him to tumble a little bit. And it wasn't even really that he wasn't performing. It was just the war of attrition. Travis Bazzana passed him because he was playing so well. Charlie Condon passed him because he was playing so well. But every time JJ Wetherholt has been on the field, he's posted elite metrics. He's the only one of the group that can play shortstop. I compared his shortstop defense. Again, this is not going to be the most dynamic player at shortstop, but David Fletcher was able to play a really solid shortstop for the Angels for several years when Andrelton Simmons was struggling with injuries. That's the sort of defender I think you're looking at. But it might be the sweetest swing in the class. It's juice to all fields. He can put the ball out of the ballpark to left center. Like Bazzana, he's 5'11". He's not the most physically imposing player. And I think the only thing that you have to question about JJ, and it's the only risk that people are really talking about, is that hamstring injury. He missed most of Team USA last fall. He didn't really play the field because of the hamstring injury. Comes back after 3 months of rehabbing it, 4 months of rehabbing it, and injures it in like the 3rd or 4th week of the season. So as long as Cleveland feels good about that hamstring, there's really not a big separator between him and Bazzana. They're extremely similar players. Bazzana pulls the ball a little bit more than Wetherholt does. But in my eyes, I think it's almost a positive, a guy that uses the whole field a little bit more than Bazzana does.
Seems like there's not much of a difference. It could go any way between 1 and 5. That these top 4 hitters.
That's dangerous to me because there's going to be some busts in there.
Yeah, there will be. There always is.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm curious, Joe. With the Guardians have what's the next picks? Mike, 36 and 48.
36 and 48.
Some names to think about in that range that you like.
Yeah, so I think that's going to be the most exciting part of this Cleveland draft. I know the number 1 pick is going to get all the headlines, but people don't understand how much money Cleveland has in this draft. Even if they gave Travis Bazzana or Charlie Condon $10.5 million, they would still have like $8.5 million to spend the rest of the way. So some guys that I like for Cleveland, and I think the crazy thing is, and I think you can expect this, guys that are ranked in the 20 to 30 range, for example, will go undrafted at the back of the 1st round because Cleveland will have reached out and said, we'll pay you more money. We'll pay you more money to be there at 36. Just don't get drafted by another team. We'll promise you more money. So I think you're going to see something kind of splashy with 36. I think you could see something splashy in the 2nd round because they have so much money to dole out in those spots. One guy that I really like for Cleveland is a first baseman outfielder by the name of P.J. Morlando. He was a top 15 prospect in this class before having kind of a slower spring. It might be the most power on the high school side of things. It might be the best hit tool on the high school side of things. He projects, for me at least, as a Kyle Schwarber type of a player who could move pretty quickly. And then knowing Cleveland, I would be stunned if they did not end up with a pretty exciting high school pitcher at one of those two spots. So that's the fun thing about having this much money for Cleveland is picks 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're probably all going to be really exciting high ceiling players because they have the money to do it.
Now explain why they have so much money. Just because they have the number one pick?
There is a slot. Mostly, yeah. There's a slot bonus associated with every pick, and when you land the number 1 pick, you are given $10.5 million to spend on that pick. You land the number 2 pick, you're only given $10 million, and so on and so forth. You take that, couple it with the fact that they were awarded a competitive balance A pick, which is due to their market size and revenue, and they get one of those every other year. And then, you just go down and down the list. So they have an extra pick in the 30s. They have the number 1 pick at pick number 1, and then they're going to have a high pick in 2, 3, 4, 5. It's why they have $18.5, $19 million to spend in this class, and it's more than anyone else.
Isn't what you're describing what Houston did with Correa and McCullers? Like, Correa wasn't supposed to be number 1, but he went number 1, and then they used the extra money to go back and get McCullers. Is that correct? Like, am I remembering that correctly?
It's exactly right.
Nice job. Nice job. You remember it better than McCullers pitching because I haven't seen him pitch in like 2 years.
He's had a lot of injuries. He's a hell of a pitcher when he's healthy. But
yeah, but when's the last time he was healthy? He's going to miss the whole season again, I think. Last thing, Joe, let's wrap it up with this. And speaking of prospects, we're talking about the Guardians selling some prospects, trading some prospects, because they need to get some proven starting pitchers, maybe even another bat. Obviously some of the top prospects in the system are already here. Some are playing well, some are not. Gabriel Arias has been a huge disappointment his time in Cleveland. Manzardo did not play particularly well when he was here the first time, but he's obviously a top prospect. Chase DeLauder. What do you think of some of these guys and their trade value here in the next few weeks?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. One thing that Cleveland has done a nice job doing over the last few years in the draft is they've actually stockpiled a good amount of left-handed power bats, and that hasn't always been the case for Cleveland. They've always kind of had a ton of center field, shortstop, second base, hitterish types guys. But you look at like C.J. Kayfis, you look at Ralphie Velasquez, you look at Chase DeLauder, you look at Kyle Manzardo. I mean, that's a lot of left-handed hitting power that is reasonably close to making its big league debut. They got the Naylor brothers. I think that's the biggest thing with Cleveland that they're going to have to decide, and it'll really dictate what they do with Kyle Manzardo is what are you going to do with Josh Naylor as his contract kind of his control years comes to an end. So that would be what I point to with Cleveland. They've got a lot of left-handed power hitting, thumping type guys, and I think that's going to draw interest from a lot of other teams. But yeah, if they could go out and use some of that ammo to go land a significant pitching piece. Cleveland, once you get to the 7th inning with the lead in Cleveland, it seems like the game is over. So, stacking that rotation with one more arm would be a nice piece.
Joe, great insight, man. We appreciate you taking the time.
Good deal.
Of course, guys. Yeah, thanks.
Joe.